Hello and welcome. I'm David Harris, President of the Urban Strategies Council in Oakland, California. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon for what promises to be an enlightening and important conversation about racial equity in early learning. This topic is certainly one that is close to my heart. The Urban Strategies Council has long worked on research and policy related to boys and men of color. Several years ago, we partnered with one of the work groups for Oakland's Starting Smart and Strong, the host of today's event. A bit of background on Oakland Starting Smart and Strong. It's a long-term project based in Oakland, California, to ensure that every child here has access to high quality early learning experiences. The project also aims to ensure that every adult in early learning spaces, this includes teachers, caregivers, and parents, has the tools they need to support every child's development. So back to the partnership between Urban Strategies Council and Oakland Starting Smart and Strong. It began as an effort to uncover and document disparities in health and education outcome for early age boys of color. Later, the group moved to focus on reporting on local solutions that were successful in closing the gaps. We all know, of course, that young Black boys and girls bring curiosity, joy, and excitement to learning spaces. However, as our research laid bare, Black children are disproportionately impacted and affected by adverse economic and social circumstances. And these circumstances are the results of institutional racism and structural inequalities. Our 2017 report included stark findings about Black children in Oakland. We found chronic school absences, higher rates of suspension, disproportionately higher rates of asthma diagnoses, and homelessness. Through its Boys of Color work group, Oakland Starting Smart and Strong decided to investigate and spread the word about innovative work in Oakland. We sought to nurture and identify ways to identify success for all children. Special attention was given to efforts with a focus on engaging families and addressing trauma. The result was the Promising Practices Portfolio, which was published in 2019. This report laid the groundwork for a workshop on anti-racist strategies in early learning. When it was offered last November, more than 200 Oakland educators attended to learn more about personal, classroom, and system strategies that support the youngest boys of color to thrive. I commend the important work of the Boys of Color Work Group, a group of educators, parent leaders, researchers, and government leaders in Oakland and Alameda County. They are focused, committed, and innovative, and today we will experience their latest offering, the panel discussion on centering young Black children in Oakland and incorporating anti-racism principles into early learning practices. But first, a bit of housekeeping before we start. When the conversation begins, you will be able to direct a question to the panel by using the Q&A feature. You may also use the chat feature to share comments and reflections during the event. But before we start, early education leader, Dr. Lawanda Wesley, will help us remember whose land we are currently occupying.
Hello, everyone. I am so glad you are here with us today. We would be remiss if we didn't talk about whose shoulders that we stand on. So, and with that respect, we want to let you know that we honor those who have come before us. And I particularly am coming from the Nissan Wintu land here in Sacramento, California. This land was ceded by and cared for by those individuals who steward the land in this area. I also want to shortly read this, this short bell hooks that helps us to honor land and just keep it in our remembrance. And it reads as it follows: honor the land. When we talk about that which will sustain us and nurture our spiritual growth as people, we must once again talk about the importance of community. For one of the most vital ways that we sustain ourselves is by building communities of resistance, places where we know we are not alone. And now you'll be invited as well to share with us where you are zooming in from. Which land, unceded land, are you sitting on that was occupied, that was not allowed, that was done through force? So you'll see that there is a link that you can figure out where you're coming from, but there's also a way that you can use the phone number to have it text directly to you. So as we think about the land and think about whose land we sit on, our Indigenous brothers and sisters, please start to think about also the actions that you can take. So we do this in some of our gatherings, but we don't always think about what actions can you take to be in community with our Indigenous brothers and sisters. So thank you. And now we invite you to also share where you're coming from. And you can place it in the chat and share it with us. And this is a way to build community with one another. All right. So as we start to do that, I would like to also begin to segue to my colleague, Nene Humphrey. And Nene Humphrey will actually serve as our moderator today to support us with this roundtable discussion. Nene is deeply rooted in early care and education. She is also one of our Oakland Unified School teachers educators, but she's also an adjunct professor at Pacific Oaks College. And she cares deeply about all things related to early education, and particularly those that affect our Black brothers and sisters and our children who are identified as Black children. And so with that said, I'd like to transition to Nene. And again, as you continue to place into the chat what land you're coming from and also what actions you can take. And so Nene, I would like to transition this to you.
Thank you, Lawanda. And thank you all for joining us in this event to support the Black Lives Matter at School Year of Purpose. Today, we're going to focus on centering young Black children in Oakland by incorporating anti-racist principles into early learning practices. Before I introduce the panel, I would like to share a story about my personal teaching practice and how it brought up change in my classroom. So years ago, I had a young Black preschooler who was transferred to my classroom in the middle of the school year. His previous teacher considered him challenging. I met with the family and listened to their concerns, and then I explained how I run my classrooms. I told him that I would only call them with good news and if there was an emergency. This was the opposite of what the family had experienced in the child's previous classroom, where they received a call almost every day to pick the child up and take him home. I was not going to do that. I told the family that my intention was to build a relationship with their child and to make sure that his needs were met. I also let them know that that I would change his behavior by the end of the year. The first day, when his parents dropped him off, the child walked into my class with a beautiful smile, and he was sweet as pie. Then his parents left, and instantly I saw the behavior that the other teachers saw. They were throwing chairs, there were swear words, and I was called names that I didn't know a child knew at the time. I told the child that not only was he's not going to tear up my classroom, but I was also not going to call his parents unless it was to tell them that he was having a wonderful day. He looked at me as though I was crazy. My co-teacher, Michelle Meadows, and I had a lot of experience with him. He threw chairs, dumped materials, and as I said, called us out of our names. But I had to establish trust with this child and his parents. Michelle and I became a tag team. Maybe it helped that we were both Black and the family was too. I was able to set boundaries, rules, and expectations in a way that he understood. It was not easy. I started drinking coffee every single morning before I went to work. But we were dedicated to giving that child what he needed, a place to feel safe. And this was done through role playing and making sure that we never took lunch breaks or days off at the same time. We gave him leadership roles and jobs in the classroom that he felt like he was in charge of his life. He was a line leader, he was the light leader. He was in charge of making sure everyone in the class cleaned up after playing. He delivered mail to other classrooms, and every day it was something different. It gave him something to look forward to, and he felt like he was important. The impact was immense. By the end of the year, the child was able to thrive without feeling like the bad child. He was a loved member of the classroom, and I kept my promise. He absolutely was a different child by the end of the school year. This example barely scratches the surface of what it can look like when we use strategies and approaches to center young Black children in school. Today, we're going to hear about a number of approaches and strategies in early learning that are in play around Oakland. So let's bring on our panelists who will tell us what's going on here. First, we have Dr. Tasha Henneman, a facilitator and researcher who co-developed a highly effective educators workshop on promising practices for nurturing and educating young Black boys. Please help us welcome Tasha. Next is Picolia Mangolo Adobu. She's the mother of 3 and the executive director of Bay Area Parent Leadership Action Network, an Oakland-based leadership development group for Black, Latino, and immigrant parents. She is also an organizer for the Campaign for Reparations for Black Students. Please help us welcome Picolia. And Dr. Lawanda Wesley. She supports educators and professional development training in early learning and quality improvement initiatives for Oakland Unified School District. She is also the co-founder and co-director of the Center for Equity in Early Childhood Education. Please help us welcome Lawanda. And last but not least, we have Taji Brown. He's working on the Oakland Unified School District's Office of Equity and Early Childhood Education Departments, which recently launched Early Literacy Kings, a fellowship program to get more men of color teachers in early learning classrooms. Please help us welcome Taji. If you would like to read more about our panelists, we dropped their links in their bios in the chat. Please check it out. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We'd like to start off with a couple of questions that I'd like each of you to respond to. And everyone has a chance to answer. Then we have follow-up questions that will be directed to you individually. Are you guys ready?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes.
So as I said, this one is for everyone. What influenced you to want to be part of the journey in pursuing equity, justice, and liberation for young children, and particularly Black children? And how do you use this quest in your work? Taji, go ahead, Tasha.
Okay, I'll start, sure. So I would just say that I became interested in this work maybe close to 15 years ago, but when I was in graduate school, I became pregnant with my son. Surprise, it was a happy surprise. But while I was pregnant with him, it was the same year, at least at this time, when Obama was elected. So we had our first Black president. I found out I was having a son. And that same year, I had also come across a study by Walter Gilliam, who has done the nationwide work around preschool expulsions, and was just really floored to learn that our preschool Black boys were disproportionately expelled from their early childhood settings at a rate that was 3 times more frequent than our K through 12 students. And so really that was the point in which I began my journey to, further explore the topic. I thought it was really important to give voice to the parent experience and the impact of the expulsions on the entire family, along with the young boys as well. And so that was really the point in time where I said that, okay, I'm going to have a young preschool boy in another year. So I want to get ahead of this phenomenon and really try to see if there's a way to make a change. And so that's how I got involved on the topic.
Thank you so much. Who would like to go next?
I'll go, Nene. Gosh, this is so deeply personal to me, and I'll try to make it really short. But I'm a daughter of Oakland, right? Born and raised, and I was born and raised at a time, honestly, the Black Panthers movement and by Black Panthers family. And I had left and moved away from Oakland back in the 90s and went to school. And then I came back to Oakland in 2015. And when I came back, I was working for Alameda County, and then I transitioned to Oakland Unified School District. And I was back in direct services, supporting children. And I started to wonder when I was visiting our programs, all the glory and amazing educators and the families who were just in themselves striving to be their best and do their best. But what I realized and saw very quickly is that some children already seemed, at times like defeated, right? Like I was wondering, like, how could so early on in life this be happening and what's causing that? And then I went back to my own story and thought about my own upbringing and what that was like, and how sometimes some educators didn't affirm me, didn't see me, didn't understand the unique trials and tribulations I was going through, but also the joy and the resilience that came with me. And so I realized that part of the joy is what I wanted for all children. And so I was fortunate enough to meet amazing people like Julie Kurtz and Dr. Julie Nicholson, and work with Oakland Starting Smart and Strong. And we set out to do the Resilient Oakland Community Kids Project that really looked at how to have a trauma responsive lens to children, but not just hold them in deficit, but to affirm them and all that they could be and all that they were. And so that's how I got to be a part of this work, from my own personal journey and what I believe about children, particularly about Black children. And much like Tasha, I also have grandchildren. So I was like, if these were my own grandchildren, what would I want for them? So I treat them as a part of that Black village, that we're gonna love on them, we're gonna nurture them, we're gonna give our families our best, but we're also gonna make sure that we hear from families. We're gonna make sure that children have a opportunity to center their voices by the way they communicate and talk with us through their play, through their connection, through the way we provide curriculum. So that's the long yet short story of how I'm deeply committed to this work and how I sort of got in it, both personal and as well as professional.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Pacolia?
Yes. So I got into this work by nature of just having a child. I was a youth organizer who was very well known for the No on Prop 21 campaign. I went off to college, found it really difficult, and became a very young mom at the age of 19, had my first child, had to go off from not working because accessing childcare was not possible, and working. Had a horrible experience in the welfare system. I distinctly remember my caseworker up in Contra Costa saying it was not possible for me to become a professional advocate and policy advocate, and that couldn't be a part of my CalWorks plan. And I told her, I'm gonna prove you wrong. And I just kept going. I kept coming back into the work. Organizing is very dear to my heart. And as a young parent, figured out ways to maneuver through CalWorks, met lots of folks who were experiencing the same thing as I was experiencing as a young mom, the trauma, the stigmas that happen in welfare, and, pushed through, had another child, went back to being a professional organizer, a paid organizer in a nonprofit at Coleman Advocates in San Francisco. And there just continued to listen. I'm a real big person about listening to the stories of families, And that's a huge part of my work, is to provide a space where they can say, this is hard, this hurts. And I want to not feel this kind of pain, and I don't want my children to feel pain. And, you know, one of the things that I heard over these years is just families wanting to feel heard, respected, safe, to just say it's hard. It's hard to be a parent, right? And have met some amazing educators, have watched amazing initiatives here in the San Francisco Bay Area and California, nationally. The organizing doesn't stop. You know, I've done so many different things to really lift up the idea that families have a right to be heard in the system, even if they don't have a PhD, even if they don't have a master's, even if they may not even be a high school graduate, that by nature of having a Black child, they have earned some level of right, if not acknowledgement, that they are the parent, right? They're, you know, and the different forms that parenting has taken on, right? So I also want to bring that lens, because I have a blended family. I have 3 children. You know, my last born in 2015, so I have a very large spread. A senior graduating, going off to college, a 5th grader going into middle school, and a kindergartner coming on in the midst of this pandemic. And I think it's important for us all to hear that, but also to then, how do you support families that have these very unique structures, right? Blended, or, you know, shout out to our aunties, our uncles, our grandmothers, our grandfathers, who are helping to raise this village that we call the Black community. And that is the journey I'm in. And that's what I wake up every day with the privilege to not only provide safe space for folks, but also to have camaraderie and an amazing conversation about how we can reclaim and amplify and expand the idea of village. And so that's what brings me to the work, the desire to really ensure that we can bring some of our traditions, you know, from our motherland of Africa and all the various cultures forward. And at the same time that we can heal as adults, so that the next generation has less work to do on this journey to really lift up the brilliance, excellence, and amazingness of Black folks.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bacolia. And Taji, can you bring us home?
Yes, thank you, everyone. First, I want to say Happy Women's History Month, especially to my queens that's here on the line with me. Unlike everyone else, I was born into the work. And some say, well, how was that? As a Black man growing up, I had to navigate the system as a Black man, as a Black child, as a Black boy, from preschool, kindergarten, all the way through, and really understanding the different challenges that as a Black man I faced, and challenges that my brothers face and other siblings. But then also what pushed me was I was given a chance. I was brought up in a household where community and family was taken first. And when you get something, you always reach back. And because I was blessed with an opportunity to be exposed to something different from the community that I was born in, I count it as an honor and a privilege to come back and to expose others and provide that same exposure that was given to me. So I've served in several capacities where for over 20 years, I worked in social services as a case manager, and wrapping up the industry as a social worker for CPS, investigating homes as a child protective worker, going in and really looking at safety. If anyone would ask me, well, what is the main thing that a social worker does when they're going into homes? They're looking at safety. And I transfer that same skill over now into the program that I'm working with, where we're looking at safety, making sure that our children, that our young scholars are safe, that they're safe and able to learn in a safe environment, that they're not being harmed or that they're not being ostracized. So how was I brought into this work? I was born into it. And also I've made, since the George Floyd incident and with my 2 young sons, I made them a promise. I said that you will not have to go through what I had to go through. So it's born into it and a promise made to my kids.
That's an amazing story. Thank you so much, Taji, for sharing that, and all of our other panelists as well. So let's go on to our individual questions. So the first one will be for Tasha. So Tasha, for many of us, when it comes to unrest and uncertainty amongst COVID, the movement for racial equity and the high suspension and expulsion rate for Black boys, along with the adultification of young Black girls, how do you stay present and grounded in so much what's going on? As well as being, what's at stake in early childhood development? That's part of your research in your graduate program and your doctoral program.
Sure. So, I mean, I will first off just acknowledge that staying grounded can be very difficult and challenging, particularly since, many of us, even just on this panel, as mentioned, we're professionals, we're parents, we're, aunties, we're community members, we have lots of responsibilities. And I think that, particularly given this time right now, especially, or this whole past year, many of us are experiencing significant stressors, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's witnessing the death of our brothers and sisters, just, by law enforcement or in the streets. It's the work, the civil unrest, all of those things. And I think that really understanding trauma and the impacts of trauma is really key to all of that, and stay, to stay grounded and leveled. I think anytime there's a perception of threat or fear or terror, along with feeling sort of a complete loss of control and sense of utter powerlessness, these are all the conditions that lead to these, traumatic situations and circumstances. And I think using that trauma-informed lens is really important to doing this work, particularly because, as had been previously mentioned, the Black community tends to be more susceptible to a lot of just injustice and bias and racism in this country, as has been witnessed for 400 years and counting. And so I think if we can name these things, name those stressors, research really shows that just merely assigning a name to them and labeling them is to what we feel can really reduce our stress. So I think, when you're doing work that involves equity and, you're talking about racism, whether it's institutional, structural, daily experiences, microaggressions, to strive to become real anti-racist individuals, programs, schools, agencies, it just requires us to be aware of that. And so self-care is imperative. For me personally, I like to spend time in nature and with my kids and with my family, and community is really important to me. And just really knowing that we can't do this work alone. And so these are some of the topics with Oakland Starting Smart and Strong that, we have unpacked in the more recent training we did around improving early learning outcomes for boys of color. And I think just really looking at those promising practices really help us start to kind of think about, okay, how do we then construct strategies that are culturally responsive, strategies that are actually doable and not just words on paper? And how do we use, research and evidence-based practices to really disrupt these systems that are so deeply ingrained in all of our systems in this country? So I think that's sort of the framing and approach that I think is necessary for this work. And I think that, we have to do it in a way of not just kind of doing our research and kind of saying, hey, well, this is a best practice or a strategy, but also just the way in which we do the work, which means we have to take time to understand the Black community and the, experiences and implications of both historical racism, current racism, and also just current practices that really affect issues of equity across all sectors. So I think for me personally, you're never gonna, well, for all of us really, you're never gonna learn it all. So we have to also keep an open mind and willingness to constantly be learners as we grow in this field and do this work. And we have to create allyship. So I love that I can be on this beautiful panel with my Black brothers and sisters here today, but we also need our non-Black brothers and sisters to be allies in this work. And we have to do it together, because together we can really move the needle and shift systems.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And before I go on, I would like to just make a quick announcement that we are having some technical difficulties with the chats. And so that we will answer questions and drop links into the Q&A. So if you can take a look at that. Thank you so much. Would anyone else like to answer that question that was directed towards Tasha?
I'll respond to that. I agree, much like Tasha, that we know that so much has inflicted our community. The system was designed to do exactly what it's doing. And when there was such a deliberate process to do what it's doing in terms of our even educational outcomes in early education, I feel it takes a deliberate process to engage in healing, and really healing from our racial, cultural standpoint of what that means for us, that we have these shared experiences, and that we start to birth in our babies and our children all that they can be, and all that their self-worth, their brilliance, not just, from an academic standpoint, which is why we're here at early education, but to really position them in life to be the best person that they can become. They become the best human they can become. And so when you show up like that every single day, and you layer that in every aspect of our work in early education, we're sure to get better outcomes than we've had before. And we move and do it differently as Black educators, but we do it also, like Tasha said, in allyship with our white brothers and sisters, our Asian brothers and sisters, our Muslim brothers and sisters, right? Because it takes the collective, and that's the spirit in which we want to really harness and cultivate. We can't do it alone, but if we have to, yeah, we'll do our best, but it really does require the collective if we're going to do it from a systems standpoint. So I echo Tasha that we want to get to a point of healing, but we can't heal if we turn back to a system that's going to continue to perpetuate us and harm us, and because it hasn't healed itself. So we have to start looking past personal, interpersonal level, and start looking at systemic and institutional ways of healing the system. And that requires deep work, which I know we'll all talk about just a little bit later today.
Thank you, Tasha and Lawanda. So the next question is for Taji. What principles do you use in your day-to-day that you incorporate into your practice?
Yes. So for me, I've been, like I said, I've been fortunate to where I've been given a position that is so awesome, to where it's not a job. I can say that. I can say this is not a job. It's a passion. It's family, to where I'm able to lead the Early Literacy Kings. It was formerly known as the Men of Color Early Literacy Project, to where we have men of color ages 18 to 24. We have 6 kings in 5 different schools, teaching literacy for transitional kindergarten using the SEEDS curriculum. And so what strategies do we use? The first strategy is, it comes from one of my supervisors, Jerome Gordine, which is love. Love. I mean, that's what our kids need, is love. And so, but then the next strategy is showing up. So our kings are showing up on a daily basis, where they're there, interacting and respecting the scholars. I think that's a part that we usually throw out is, but they're respecting, and then they're building that community of wanting to learn. And they're building that rapport where they have an expectation, and they have a high expectation, but they're also meeting our scholars where they're at. So they're not talking down to them, but they're talking with them. The other thing, and just talking with somebody earlier that just even brought it more, is also with the age range of our kings. They're far enough, but not too far to where our young scholars can look to them and see themselves. They can be like, oh, wait, hold on. That could be me. And then also as this men, they're able to give identity to our young scholars. They're able to affirm them in ways to push them to say, hey, you got this, you can do this. I love it. I visited one class with one of our kings where he's bilingual. So when he's doing the literacy work with the students, he's also speaking in their native language. He's not, and if they answer back in their native language, he's not, no, don't say it in English, but he sits there, he responds back, and then he comes back with English to where it shows them the respect for their native language, respect for their home culture, but then also taking them to that next level, letting them know, but here's where we're assessing and trying to get that understanding. So they're building that, but it's all done in love. And I think that is the key of our work, is love, because if once we step outside of that, then when our students are like, oh, they're just here for a paycheck, it's over. It becomes that competitive control environment to where now we're trying to bring them in. But if we show them love, we're respecting them, we're building that community of learning, making learning fun, then we will be able to grow together. And so those are the key strategies that we're using in the Early Literacy King Project.
That alignment is wonderful. I love that strategy of just love and respect. That's what our kids need. So Dr. Lawanda, how do you give power to liberating young Black students from or abolishing policies that continue to harm them through the systemic regulations that don't understand them or their culture? I mean, that goes back to what you were saying earlier.
Yeah, it really touches on that, Nene. And I want to, respond to the part, how do we give our children and families power? They've always had the power, right? Mm-hmm. It's not that they didn't have a sense of agency of who they were. They know who they are. They know how they move. It's somehow that when they go through our educational system and they go through this thing called life in our society, particularly here in the United States, somehow that starts to get squeezed out of them, or we chip away at that. And so I think it's about what my brother and my brother Taji talked about, is that how do we affirm children to see themselves in the curriculum? How do we affirm children to see themselves in the pages of books that aren't deficit, right? Not seeing themselves in books, for example, where all the children are living in apartment buildings, right? But they're living in suburban communities, or they're living in other communities that aren't about this deficit narrative. And I really want to give a lot of respect to our partners in this work, New Teacher Center. We start thinking about having a strategic plan. You talk how to be deliberate. In our strategic action plan, we actually name, we're going to be anti-racist, anti-bias, early learning division within Oakland Unified School District. It is named. You cannot change what you do not name. And so we have elements and components and dimensions and ways that we're working deliberately. When we think about our work, we turn right back to that strategic action plan. Or in our leadership team meetings, we are talking about who we are as leaders in this work. How close are we to the proximity of the problem, whether we're privileged or whether we've been put on this hierarchy sort of continuum of not being seen and being made invisible. And I have this notion that we can't do performative wokeness. We can't do it. And performative wokeness is like, we're going to talk it with our mouth. We're going to give it lip service. But when it's time to actually do the work, it's incongruent to each other. So your words and your actions should match up so that we don't engage in performative wokeness, right? Mm-hmm. And so we want to cultivate the genius that always have lied within our children and our families. We don't need to give them power. They've always had it. What they need is to have themselves affirm, and we need to do the work side by side with families. So I think Pocolia will answer in just a bit. So that's my answer to that response.
Well, that's a great segue to Pocolia's next question that I have for her, which is, what does incorporating anti-racist principles into early learning practice look like in action? What forms does it take? What policies need to be put in place?
Yes.
Change takes place.
Yes, all of that. I'm just sitting here taking notes. I'm sorry, y'all. But with that said, what Lawanda just said is really important in partnership with families, right? And so one of the things that, we have this amazing, process as organizers do is to kind of help families take their brilliance, take their solutions and put them into the policies, right? Put them into the face of the decision makers and say, hey, so now let's see which actions are. And that's exactly what we're doing right now here in Oakland. We have a Reparations for Black Students campaign. And it's doing exactly everything that folks are talking about. It's starting the conversation around how do you center a whole system, two systems really, because early childhood is its own system. And then there's the K-12 system that the early childhood system interacts with. We're gonna name that, but we ain't gonna talk too much about that and all that. But I wanna name that primarily because we're gonna ground in on the early childhood because it doesn't get as much play as the K-12 system. In early childhood, we have to look at those individual acts, right? That have set Black children on a path to be a part of the school to prison pipeline. My experience when I listen to Black mothers, particularly pregnant Black mothers, right? They're not having a joyful experience, right? They're not being celebrated. They go into hospitals very scared of for their life, and they have a justified reason. We have mothers coming out of the hospital not being really supported. That's a justified reason. And so part of what we name in this Reparations for Black Students policy is what is our set of solutions from the cradle up, right? And we're asking for policies to be developed after we evaluate what we currently already investing in, because there's still not a lot of transparency around what we do for Black children. We all talk about it, but on paper and to Black parents, it's still very much so not transparent. And that's one of the things that we hear so much from Black families as we do listening sessions, as we have done listening sessions. So that's the first step, is just, can we get an analysis of what was already been put in place? Is it effective? Can we see how many children are being served? After all of that, then we can start talking about how do we tear apart the policies that currently exist in the system that may be barriers to people accessing those services. Create policies that may have to dictate to folks how to actually center Black children. We have a system in Oakland that does not affirm the Black identity at all of any of us, that invisibilizes us. We might have to set some things in place in order to really help folks who are Black, Latino, Asian, and beyond understand what it looks like to be anti-racist, and to really center that. We cannot assume that everyone understands what anti-racism is. And that's a huge part of the work. We call for that in this policy. Most importantly, and I don't want to, we can go through the details, and I want to thank Veronica for dropping in the chat, that you can go to our website, reparationsforblackstudents.org, and you read all about the policy. But the last thing I really want to center on, because it's about action, is it calls for us to make a long-term commitment. Now, we are all currently in this system right now, right? But who knows, right after this webinar, we might all get amazing job offers, and, they might be lucrative, and we might have to make some personal decisions. You know what I'm saying? Y'all laughing, but you know what I mean. So point is, we as individuals can have the most amazing analysis around our systems, but our systems have to have policies that make sure that they stay focused. And one of the core things that we are really pushing for is that longer term commitment. And where I think there is so much alignment in Oakland is around the fact that actually we all agree we need a 5-year, 10-year, 20-year commitment to center Black kids. Whether that's in our early childhood system, in our K-12 system, let's look at all the systems that Black children are touching and really say, are we closing opportunity gaps? Hello. Are we closing these opportunity gaps? Because we know that there's not equal opportunity for Black children. And we have to be able to commit to that journey. We have to commit to that hard work. Those that might know, we have to commit to that boulder that we got to push up all the way up to the mountaintop and say, this boulder of oppression, it's been squishing some folks. And we need to take that squishing off of some people, put this boulder at the top, and all of us be accomplices, not just allies, because that word is, I want allies, that's great, but I want accomplices that are gonna help me push that boulder so we can chip it away step by step so it doesn't exist. And so that is what it looks like to be anti-racist in action. It's less talk and a lot more looking at our individual acts and really looking at how we set policies up, because we are human and we need guidance.
So Pecolia, I have a question from Randall Shaw in Toronto, Canada.
Toronto, let's go.
And they would like to know, how can they integrate an anti-racist approach to their professional practice, as well as allow for more personal growth for their own Black child?
Ooh, yeah. So first and foremost, I think it's important to get clear about what anti-racist principle are you trying to touch, right? In your individual practice. And I center on the self first, because we act from the self. What we think is how we act, right? So if you think a Black child has to listen to you as a parent, and you're willing to beat your child in order for them to listen to you as a parent, that's a part of changing behavior, right? Changing and putting the anti-racist principles into action. Not vilifying you if that's where you're at, but acknowledging that's where you're at is the journey, right? And making a decision to want to get to a different part. And we see that transformation at Plan. We see that transformation in this campaign of folks being like, oh, I got to change me. And in changing me, I change my family. And in changing my family, I can change my community. And in changing my community, I can look at institutions, even within institutions. So I think there's the first thing. And the second thing is you cannot escape that institutions are built on policies. And policies make practice either good or bad, right? For example, you don't see everybody in this country wearing dashikis to work. That's a practice that has not become the policy of this country, right? We still debating about whether I can wear my hair like this to a corporate office. And that's enforced by policy. In fact, it got to the whole of the Supreme Court as a debate around whether Black identity can exist. So we have to touch policy. You have to look at it, scurry, and sometimes you might have to go multiple decades back, because up until, most people don't know this, up until the 2010s, on the books in most school districts, you still had 1950s, 1960s policies in place that still said Negroid and other things, retarded and other things. And it took a concentrated movement to say, why are we still allowing districts across our country to use terms that no longer are politically correct, let alone illegal? Right. So policy is a huge part of it. I don't want to take too much time more, but I just want to really lift that up, to do that work, to look at your current policies and how they affirm or deny Black identity.
No, I really appreciate it. That was a great answer. So for Tasha, I have a question for you. And this question is from Rachel Hahn in Oakland. What are your perspectives on factors that contribute to positive, joyful, and learning-filled school settings for Black preschoolers? That can be for you or for Lawanda to answer.
Sure. So what are the positive things or factors that are there? So I would say first and foremost, I would say a philosophy within the preschool setting that really is mindful of, anti-racist practices. And so making sure that the environment isn't just, sort of set in stage for being multicultural, but that there are deeper rooted practices where, the early childhood professionals in those programs are being very intentional about engaging with parents and learning about the families that are in their care. That, beyond just having books or posters or representation of multicultural families, but that there's more of the training and the deep-rooted work that's being done. I think it's really important to have play be an integral process around that philosophical or pedagogical approach with young children in early childhood. I think with all of the shifts right now, as it relates to kindergarten readiness, we have, shifted a lot of our practices to be much more academically focused as opposed to play focused. And I think it's just really important, especially for young Black boys, that they need to move, and movement needs to be a big part of that. Yes, Casey, representation. We need our teachers, our educators to look like the families that we serve. And so I actually, in partnership with Berkeley City College and the YMCA in Oakland, work with a cohort of people where we're trying to be very intentional around recruiting teachers of color into the field. And this is being done on high school campuses in East Oakland, at Castlemont, as well as Oakland High. And so starting even younger and trying to get folks, to consider an educational pathway. And so that's more of a programmatic level. I think those are some key things that we could be doing to really create positive experiences. And yes, Stephen, more male teachers, absolutely. We need to get, more male teachers into the field, absolutely.
Thank you so much. And Taji, in your program, how can you explain how we foster curiosity about differences without othering? And what are some ways to center and celebrate Black joy? This is from Shannon Nash.
Othering. And so seeing the child, the scholar, for who they are. So if it's a Black scholar, acknowledge that it's a Black scholar. If it's a white scholar, acknowledge it's a white scholar. And seeing them, not because they're Black saying, oh, you can't do. I think what we have to do is an inward look within ourselves to really begin to look at our biases, because the othering really takes place based on our biases. So if I have a bias against, say, black boys, they're running rambunctious, so they want to wrestle, so they don't have no discipline or no this, then that's me. And so now I'm going to other that child. I'm going to isolate that child. I'm not going to allow that child in. But what I have to do is I have to see that child, bring that scholar in, but then also begin to show that scholar them in literature, them in the curriculum, them, so that they see themselves, that they're feeling part of, not growing up and then buying the book, The Lies My Teacher Told Me, where I have to wait till I get to college and then really learn what true history is, but really taking the time to give them their history, spending time learning about their culture, learning about their family. Because the one thing I will always say, every Black child is not the same. Every Black family is not the same. And so as a teacher, as an educator, it's also my responsibility to find out about that family so that I can find that community and show that respect for that family, for their culture, and then and just bringing them in and seeing them. I will always throw that in. See the scholar for the scholar. So instead of saying the Black boy, it may be Michael, or it may be Jamal, it may be David. So calling them by their name also identifies who they are versus Black boy. And that brings the joy in there, because then that child, that young scholar is being affirmed as you call their name. It's like, oh, my teacher knows me. Oh, my teacher, and celebrate them for their wins.
Yes, absolutely.
We have to go to a strength-based, celebrate for the wins versus, oh, you didn't do that right. Well, this is what you did right. So I'm going to continue to celebrate you here and push you here, but my celebration is going to be at your wins.
Yes, and involving the families as well, let the families be acknowledged that they are part of this community as well. Mom walks in, hey mom, hi grandma, or whoever it is, who is raising that child at the same time. So thank you so much, Taji. So I have a question from the audience. It's very small print, so excuse me while I read it. And this is going to be for anyone who would like to answer. This is from Amy Claw. Given the young children need what they need, and this is sometimes require a lot of one-on-one connections and work with teachers, how do you manage this when your child and your child teacher ratio is 1:8 or so? What supports are you getting, or what do you need to continue to do the amazing work you described, along with your very important mindset of doing whatever it took to build a strong relationship with the child described?
I think it's an interesting question, and I think my colleagues are going to need to chime in. But really trying to unpack, Amy, what you mean about more one-on-one. What does that mean? Are you saying in particular for Black children or just children in general? But I will say within our Black culture, we work as a collectivist, right? So we don't see, and that's the other thing. We don't, the Eurocentric cultural framework around education might do a one-on-one. We see the work with our children as a collective, that it is engaging the family. It's also going to engage the teachers in the classroom as family. Like everyone is called into the work to work with that child and become audaciously crazy in love with that child. And we do have 1-to-8 ratios in our particular school district. But we also have we have strong partners who are seated in our work. So I think part of the ratio, we know that we only can have so many teachers in the classroom in terms of funding and cost and expense around that. But then how do we use our partners that are a part of our programs that come in? How do we bring in the community that becomes a part of the classroom culture? So, again, I might need a little more clarity on the one-on-one that you're saying, Amy. But I just will say within the Black community, we see anyone who's engaged in the caretaking of that child as part of that child's life. And if you are in love with that child, there's nothing you won't do. Sometimes that child might need one-on-one. Sometimes I have to tag team and go, Pecolia, today is not the day. Right. And when we talk about a trauma responsive lens, it's just like if you were in a 2-parent household, one day I might be the parent that's best for that child. The next day I got to call on Pecolia or Tasha, like, you guys, you got that? Okay. So I'm going to step away because I may be so dysregulated to that child that day that I'm not the best one who's going to be ready to be attuned to that child. I'm deeply in love with that child in that moment. I love them, but just like any child, our buttons get pushed. So, I think it's a long way of answering that question, not really completely understanding it fully, but it's a collectivist approach. So it might require one-on-one in one moment, and it might require I call my sister and Pecolia or Tasha or my brother Taji to support that particular child.
Mm-hmm. I would just like to acknowledge that from, an infrastructure standpoint, the ECE field in general, I think has sort of taken a short stick as opposed to not to pit K-12 against us. But I do think that there are a lot of workforce inequities, even starting from the licensing process to the requirements to the ratios. I think that we could stand to have some change in those areas. And so I also would just say that I think that never give up on sort of voicing some of these structural challenges that exist within the field and that exist within the systems. And we do have to have ways where we can push back and say, hey, community care licensing, we really need ratios to look like this. And who are the stakeholders that we need to talk to? Who are the legislators we need to talk to? And really take some true account and hold the state or local government accountable for some of, these really tough challenges that impact our field. And I think a lot of those workforce inequities, and I don't mean to be tangential here and get off topic, but I do think that they impact the quality of work that, early childhood professionals do, because, it's tough to stay in the field when you have these types of workforce inequities.
And as someone who's, and I know I'm the facilitator, but I just want to say for Amy, because I am in the classroom, sometimes at nap time, it might not be nap time for that child. And that's when you can give that child one-on-one when everyone is laying down. Sometimes, little Tommy might need to go outside in the backyard and run around a few times, and you toss the ball and have them run and run some of that energy or whatever out. And that's when you have a tag team system like Michelle and I had. I would go to lunch and she would take, Jimmy outside and they'd have their little time on the floor. Some of my colleagues will know I have what you call Nene time. And so when it's Nene time, that's when they get their 101 or 201 and, we meet needs that we can't do in the whole group. And when I say it's not Nene time yet, that child understands, okay, it's not Nene time yet. When can I get my Nene time? You let that child know, you inform that child, and then they'll be ready for Nene time or Amy time or whatever time. But, you know, sometimes you just have to make that child's needs met at a different time, so you get a different type of behavior that you're looking for, because
May I
they
add a
really
little-
are rooting for them.
May I add one piece to it that I think might be helpful to the conversation? I have a son who goes to 0 to 60 quick with anger. Just, I'm mad. And one of the things that I thought was so innovative about his preschool and what they did is they really tried to figure out ways in which to make the director's time a little bit more flexible in the morning, so that if those scenarios happen, because it wasn't just my son, there were other children who had the same kind of reaction. They just immediately mad and would stay mad. And he wasn't able to put words to how he was feeling at first. And so they worked with, how do you describe what you're feeling? And over time, because that time was set aside in the director's capacity in the morning, that allowed her to be an extra hand in the setting, so that there could be that time where, you know, one of the teachers or the, you know, assistant teachers could give that extra second of time. And I think that's just a really important practice to think about, because often we think directors are supposed to deal with our master teacher, supposed to deal with the background of the preschool setting, the educator setting, and not necessarily be so involved in the morning or the day of. But as kids are coming in and out of our settings, how do we provide them with the reality that they may need extra care in that transition? It might be a bad morning. They might not, you know, I know my child would have a day where he would grab onto my leg. I don't want to go to school. And so just how do we create those structures when we know those are little humans who are trying to figure it all out? So I just want to put that into a context of when I say around policy. What do we need to do in our policies to ensure that we're not bottling down our directors and our master teachers with the background work when they also have this amazing capacity to help in the classroom?
Absolutely.
And I want to,
Taji?
yes, I wanted to second what Pacolia saying, because when I first heard the question, it was community. Because I'm thinking about some days, some of our young scholars, they need that one-on-one time, or there's different issues to where that one-on-one time, and maybe that teacher has established that relationship to where that teacher is the safety outlet. So we have to establish then procedures to where that teacher can call on and be like, okay, I need some assistance down here because I'm working with David. I'm very much into saying the child's name, if you can see, to where this is what I'm doing. Because why? Because I'm affirming this child. And then also, if we recognize that it's been a bad day, or, you know, that one-on-one time has happened, then probably when David comes down in the afternoon, maybe a director, maybe a site administrator, maybe another floater within there can just come in and be like, hey, David, just come in and see how you doing, check it in, to where it's providing community. Because the one thing we have to recognize is that, yes, these are little humans, as Pacolia said. They are young scholars, to where they don't have the words yet. They're developing those skills. And so as professionals, what we want to try to do is model it, to even, it may be a time to where that one-on-one is just not working. And it's not working to where I feel myself escalating. So how am I going to model it? I'm modeling it by saying, you know, David, I'm calling Lawanda in to come help me out. And Lawanda's going to work with you and talk with you because I need a timeout. But what's going to happen is I'm going to come back and we're going to talk about it and we're going to work through, because it's about relationships. And if we can build those relationships, but then also pull in the family. It'll always go back, pull in the family, see what it is, check in. Did something happen this morning? Did something happen last night? Is there anything? And not from like a nosy point, but like, I'm concerned because I'm seeing this and I want to figure out how can I be of assistance to help David manage, to help David get to where he's trying to get to and verbalize his feelings and his emotions.
Give him the language. Thank you so much, Taji. And that's a great segue to another audience question. How do you sustain yourself in this work when you face hostility in the workplace or have a lack of support? Because sometimes, maybe your director or master teacher isn't there because, not only because they might be in the office, they can be in a conference, they can be in a meeting with another teacher or in the classroom with someone else. So that is our next question. How do you sustain yourself in this work when you face hostility in the workplace or have a lack of support? Because it is all about relationships. Ms. Lawanda, you are on mute.
So for me, I have to remember who I'm in service of. This is not about me. This is not about Pecolia. This is not about Miss Nene. This is not about Taji. This is about raising up the next generation of children. And so when it gets really tough, and it gets tough, and I have this emotion in my voice because there's days you grow weary, right? You grow really weary and you want to rest your soul and your spirit. But I also remember when we did the land acknowledgement, is that I stand on others' shoulders. And if it had not been for them, it would not be for me. If it's not for me, then how do I know that the next generation is going to be cared for? It's on me. Those we are looking to come and so-called rescue us or do this work, you're looking at, just go in the mirror. You're looking at yourself. And so when you get tired and you get to rest, I'm not saying not rest, because the highest resistance is to engage in self-care, like Tasha said, in this work. But you have to remember why you're doing this and find at least one person. And if there's no one else but the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of us in this space right now, that's who we start with, and that's who we stay with. If we can grow it, like we did on our EC leadership team, who are now leaning into the work, and not everybody on that team looks like me or looks like Taji. And it's beyond, the co-conspirator is real. They are co-conspiring to have a better than what we've done before. My grandma would say, when you know better, you do better, right? And so now that's what we're trying to cultivate, from a parallel process from our leadership team to the children and our families, working directly with them to design what they want for their children. We don't need to design it for them. They know what they want. We just need to be a support in the system. And also the other thing is, when you get tired, you got to challenge the system back. I'm sorry, you can't name what you don't. If you don't name it, you can't challenge it. Name what you're seeing, right? When I talk to curriculum developers and they want to give me garbage curriculum for my babies, because I do see them as my babies, I'm like, no, how are my kids seeing themselves in that activity? And don't give me the quick books, because they're quick to give you like a book or something. Don't give me a quick book. Tell me how my kids see themselves in the actual day-to-day curriculum. When you challenge them on that, you get all kinds of, we didn't, I want you to go back and think, right? Challenge the system and do it respectfully, but have them have a check on themselves. Like Pecolia talked about accountability. Hold people accountable so that we're doing it together. Create a rubric that says, if we're gonna work for anti-racism and anti-bias, this is what it freaking looks like. And then when you have, these are the non-negotiables. That's what you got to do. And that way you don't carry the load by yourself, but you also still a shepherd. You're still shepherding the process along the way. You are being the steward and the shepherd of that, but you're not doing it alone. Create systems that will help you do this together. And if you only start with 2, start with 2. You grow it to 3, so we're going to be 3 for a whole year long. If we grow it to 4 or 5 in 3 years, that's who we're going to be. Mm-hmm. And now the system is us. We are the system. We keep the system. The system is you. It's me. It's Pecolia. It's Taji. It's Nene. And we all have different points where we touch the system, but we either privilege in the system or we are oppressed in the system. And then we think about what it looks like on the continuum. We got work to do, y'all. Mm-hmm.
And how is that going to affect the kids and the families in our program?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I'll just add, because there's a comment that I want to make sure. I think it's important because language has a lot of meaning, right? And so obviously in a panel format, we're speaking from, our experiences. And so I want to name one of the challenges in being anti-racist is there are many assumptions made based off of the English words that we all use. And so I just want to invite folks to assume best intentions, right? Because a lot of what ends up happening in this work is that we want perfection, and perfection is not possible when you're doing anti-racist work. Perfection is one of the many things that really ends up making us gaslight each other. Oh, you didn't say it right, or you didn't do it right, or you didn't move it right. And I want to name that because that's there is no perfection in this. We're all going to be trailblazing. Y'all hear me? We're all trailblazing. And so the question that I want to make sure we are also centering is, how do we give each other the space to make mistakes, but not harm? Because we often harm each other in this work, and then people get turned off and then they just go back to being oppressive. And I want to name that really clearly, because that's the experience that as we're changing these systems, we have to be able to be conscientious that we're talking about humans having a human experience amongst young people, young children who are little bitty humans having a human experience. And we're all trying to figure out how to interact with each other and not harm each other. And that's not easy. It's not the easiest of work. So I just want to also name that.
So how do we uplift and not cancel?
That's a good question. And I think that, so I want to center on our small, I love my little babies, and I want to center first and foremost that they're brilliant. Have you talked with a 2-year-old? Have you had a conversation with a 3-year-old? A 4-year-old is just amazing. I just love 4-year-olds. They're like my favorites, because they're like, well, why? I don't understand. Can you explain? But they really, can you show me? That's my favorite one. Come with me. Yes. But one of the things they're the voice we're not actually listening to. They tell you exactly what they want, need, and desire. We as humans, adults, we have turned off, like, well, why do I have to do what you want? There's always this power dynamic that I want to name that we have to be really conscientious of, right? So that's the first voice that I think we have to uplift, is who we're serving, who we're doing this all for. We have to really ensure that we're centering children's voice in these conversations. So that's the first one. And then the second one is, I have to say it, the dynamic of who is parenting. And I want to say the dynamic of who is parenting, because again, in the Black community, it is indeed a village that is raising our children. And so I do not, one of the things that, we talk about at Plan is, should we be Plan or Flan? Is it parent or family? Should we go Bay Area FLAN, Family Leadership Action Network? Because we have aunties, we have uncles, we have different family structures, right? We have, we have 2 moms raising each other. We have gender different folks, the full spectrum raising Black children, right? And so I want to shout out Stephen in the chat, much of the reference to has to kind of expand the definition of village, right? And that each of those have a different experience and a voice that needs to be lifted up. One of the most amazing stories I heard when I first started in this work was a grandma. She said, wait a minute, you mean they got to go to daycare every day? And I was like, yeah, every day is the goal. She's like, well, that doesn't work for me. And we had to have a conversation about, she was, I got appointments on this day and we got this situation, and we talked it through. And I said, well, what do you want for your grandchild? And she said, well, I want them to learn. And I was like, okay, so how do you learn? And we just walked on through it. And guess what? She was like, you know what? He can't learn if I'm just going once a week or twice a week. And we got to an understanding that we were like, you need more support to get your child to that school, that class every day, right? That amazing experience that's going to help them read. And I'm apologize, Taji, I don't remember the son's name, but I'm gonna call him Jamal for now. So Jamal got a different experience over time because grandma had that conversation, but we had to acknowledge that she was the one that was the parenting in the space, right? So I just want to lift those 2 voices up. The other thing that I'm gonna name, because I have to, is that when people develop the solution, we also have to be aware of allowing them to come however they show up and push for that solution. Because I do think one of the dynamics that I hear mostly about in the Bay Area and around the nation is that I did tell you what I needed, and I told you in your focus focus group, in the workshop, in the parent council, and then you didn't do what I told you. And so that accountability to, once it's lifted, how do you hold yourself accountable in those spaces?
Thank you so much. Tasha, can you add something to that? Would you like to?
Sure. I mean, I just wanted to say that, I mean, I think this pretty much goes without saying, but that, you know, today we're talking about racial equity, but obviously issues of equity span across gender, span across ability, span across other, you know, constructs that we're maybe not necessarily calling out today or specifying on, but just again, acknowledge to Stephen's point, we're definitely happy to continue the conversation, provide more resources specific to maybe some supports that you're asking about. So please stay in contact with us after this. Our colleagues definitely, we do this work across the issue and topic of working with all types of families, including queer families and queer families of color as well. And I also just sort of wanted to call out to Pacolia's earlier point around just advocacy and policy and shifts, to just share with this group that we're in such a important moment right now in history where people are listening and people are seemingly wanting to be part of this change that's happening in support of, you know, sort of shifting the needle for Black families and children in this country right now. And I will say that I think part of, at least for the early childhood sector, what we have to really consider and do is to think about how we reconceptualize what readiness means right now. I think earlier I already talked about some of the negative impacts of like kindergarten readiness, sort of in terms of there's this high stakes ability movement where, you know, we want kids to be more academically focused. And so that push down to early childhood is impacting things like the importance of play. But in addition to that, if we're talking about early childhood programs, we tend to be very focused on center-based care, particularly public centers, because they're connected to the district, so our CDCs. And really, we have a lot of Black children who are in family childcare programs, who are with family, friends, and neighbors, and they're being left out of the conversation. So I just want to call out that although I feel like there's been some legway at the local state levels, for example, really not until 2017, there were no guidelines or regulations on expulsions for California preschool, state preschool programs. But there was a bill, AB 752 by Assemblymember Rubio, who called this out, and even the bill itself could use some additions to it, but it was a great start. But I think we need to be thinking about, you know, remembering the broader community of early childhood spaces, early child care spaces, because we're just leaving a lot of our babies out in these discussions. I also will just call out, this isn't necessarily an effort for early childhood, but perhaps maybe could have an impact. But like last session, Assemblymember Weber, who's now our Secretary of State, Dr. Weber had a bill, AB 3121, that really is the first time that the state is creating an advisory task force to start discussions around Black reparations and what that means for the state. So there are some really big shifts right now that you know, warrant acknowledgement and could really impact the work that we're all doing at the early childhood field. So as much as we can curtail on these efforts and remind these stakeholders that ECE needs to be considered and called out, then, you know, the better and more powerful our efforts can be on a grander scale.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. Yes, Taji?
I've enjoyed everything, what everyone has said, but if I can just go back to the one part of that question, because it talked about burnout, what do you do? For the past year, we've been on screen. We've been online.
Yes.
We've been going hard in the paint. Like I said, I'm a former social worker. I told somebody this last year has been the hardest for me than even as a social worker with making decisions of life and death. And so and I can understand where administrators are not feeling they're being heard, teachers not feeling they're being heard, parents not feeling they're being heard. We're all saying the same thing. But what I will say to my educators, my family that's on screen today, take a vacation. It's okay. Take time off to reset. We need to take that time for ourselves, because if we're not resting, we're up trying to figure out, well, my family over here, they don't have money, they don't have food. Oh my God, my family here, this and this and this and this. My family here, this and this and this and this. But then, oh my God, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to pay my rent this month now too, because my bills have exceeded. Oh, my family's going through this. Take a break. Take time to rest. Trust when you come back, call out what you see, say what's going on, address the problems, address the issues. But if you rest, I promise you, self-care. And I know people are probably laughing because they're like, well, we've been going hard in the paint. Christmas break. This is just Taji. Taji went black for 2 weeks. I didn't pick up a phone. I didn't check an email. If you sent me something, I did not respond. But when I came back in January, I was rested and I was ready and I was able to move forward. I was able to handle everything going on. Why? Because I took time for me. Colleagues, family. You have family. Some of us as educators, we have children who are in distance learning. So we're educating and teaching at the same time. We're in meetings and in school with our kids at the same time. It's a different world right now. It's a different era right now. Take time for yourself. Zoom fatigue. All this is in. We have to do that. So that will be my advice to anyone that's feeling burned out, feeling like you're not being heard, feel like you're at the end of your ropes, feel like you want to cuss the parents back out. Take a break. It's okay. I promise you, you'll have a job when you come back because you're needed. So take a break and rest. That's all. That's my advice.
I think that's great advice, Taji. Thank you so much. Anyone else want to add to some self-care and some self-love? I would like to thank all of our panelists for joining us today and sharing their experiences and their strategies. Hearing their stories and insights really just inspires hope that we can make change and that we're meaningful to support young Black children. But before we close, I'd like to share these words from abolitionist teacher, Bonita Love. To love all children, we must struggle together to create the schools we are taught to believe are impossible. Schools built on justice, love, joy, and anti-racism.
Thank you.
With that said, I think we just get back to Black love, Black joy, Black resilience, Black living, Black eating, Black moving, and hopefully we continue to instill that with our children. And Taji, thank you for sharing those last words.
Yes, and with that, we just get back to family. If we look at history, especially within our Black family, we've been taught through history separation. We've been but if we get back to family, listening to our families, seeing our students and learning about them and affirming who they are, we can do this and we can make the change. We will be the change in order for the change.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Appreciate everyone. You know, we've done a full year as effective today. We've done a full year, maybe in a couple of days. So I just want to appreciate you all for your commitment and your dedication to our children, to surviving this very new phenomenon in our generation, and for continuing to be committed to the growth necessary to create an anti-racist society. Appreciate you from the bottom of my heart, and for every parent and for every community that you are working with. Just continue to give yourself the grace to grow.
Tasha, any last words?
I always come out of these spaces just feeling so recharged and renewed and energized to continue keeping on the fight and to keep on keeping on. So I just thank everyone who called in today. I wish I could see your beautiful faces, but seeing some of the comments in the chat and hearing some of the questions, I just know that you are all sort of a really caring and thoughtful group of citizens who want to be a part of this work. And I just appreciate you taking time out of your day today to tune in. And we always learn so much about this work, hearing from others. So just happy to walk away feeling like, okay, when's the next time we can all convene and continue the conversation?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing, everyone. It was lovely having you on our panel. And now I would like to bring up Priya Jagannathan, the director of Oakland Starting Smart and Strong, to close us out.
Great. Thank you so much, Nene, for your powerful and skillful facilitation today. I also first of all, I want to take a breath. That was so powerful, meaningful. So much knowledge was shared with all of us. And I just want to extend my very deep appreciation to all of our speakers, to David, to Tasha, Lawanda, Pacolia, and Taji, in addition to Nene. Your conversation, your leadership, your work has really illustrated important strategies to support Black children and families. And to all of our audience members, we appreciate you taking the time to participate today, and we welcome the opportunity to continue the conversation and the work together to create joyful and anti-racist learning environments for our young children and their families. We know, we had some technical difficulties. Thank you for bearing with us. We had a lot of questions and comments that we couldn't get to today, but we will put them together in a Q&A doc, and we will ask our panelists to weigh in on them and send that out along with the recording to everyone via email. We also invite you to stay in touch through the Oakland Starting Smart and Strong newsletter. And I want to let folks know that this event was planned in collaboration with Bank Street College of Education's Black Lives Matter at School Early Childhood Symposium. And the Center for Equity in Early Childhood Education plans to hold another event in this series, along with several partners. And that event will be in the fall and will focus on supporting children's healthy racial development and will be publicized nationally. So we know the conversation will be ongoing. With that, I want to just thank you all again for your participation.